So, I want you to picture a very specific night in American history. The date is February 28, 1983.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. And if you were to walk outside and look down the street of almost any neighborhood in the country, you'd notice something incredibly eerie.
It was quiet, wasn't it?
Exactly. The streets are entirely quiet.
Uh-huh.
And over in California, specifically around the San Francisco Bay Area, there are actually these severe winter storms raging.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, massive power outages are sweeping across the state. But despite the weather, despite the chaos of a blackout, an absolutely staggering number of people are huddled inside anywhere they can find a working screen.
Just a massive captive audience.
Right. Over 105 million viewers, and it actually reached a total audience of 121.6 million people at its peak.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. They all sat down in their living rooms for a single television broadcast.
Well, and when you look at the population of the United States at that time, you're talking about over half the country viewing the exact same images at the exact same moment.
Yeah, that's almost hard to wrap your head around today.
It is. I mean, we tend to think we still have a monoculture today with, viral internet moments or whatever, but this was a true undivided national event.
Right.
It was a collective focus that is honestly almost mathematically impossible in today's fragmented media landscape.
And the craziest part is they weren't watching a Super Bowl.
Yep.
They weren't watching a moon landing or some presidential address or a breaking live news event. They were watching a comedy about a war.
Specifically, MUH.
Exactly. They were sitting down for Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, the 2.5-hour series finale of MASH. But the creators of this show were about to do something terrifying.
Yeah, they really didn't play it safe.
Not at all. Instead of giving the audience this comforting send-off, they were going to systematically break every single character the public had spent a decade falling in love with.
It's a phenomenal creative risk, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have 121 million people tuning in, expecting a fond farewell.
Right, a nice little victory lap.
Exactly. But instead, the writers deliver this masterclass in balancing comedy with profound, just unflinching pain. They bypass the easy sentimentality completely.
Which is so rare for television.
It is. What they produced is a deep examination of grief, trauma, friendship, and the incredibly chaotic, often violent transition from war to peace.
So whether you watched it live on that stormy night in 1983, or, caught it years later in syndication, or even if you've never seen a single frame of this show, we're doing a deep dive today.
We are indeed.
We're going to look at how a half-hour comedy series managed to deliver one of the most emotionally true portrayals of survival ever put on screen.
It's the gold standard for how to end a story.
It really is. And to understand the magnitude of what they achieved, we first have to look at the sheer, suffocating weight of expectations resting on this broadcast.
Well, the financial metrics alone paint a surreal picture. I mean, advertisers were paying $450,000 for a 30-second commercial block.
Wait, okay, I'm stuck on this. Let's do the math there. Because, adjusted for inflation, that is the equivalent of about $1.45 million today.
Wow. Yeah, for a 30-second spot.
For a fictional, scripted goodbye. Why was the economic weight of this broadcast heavier than the Super Bowl of that exact same year? What was the psychological hook?
So, you really have to look at the psychology of parasocial relationships to understand it.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Sure. Over the course of 11 seasons, the audience hadn't just been passively watching the doctors, nurses, and soldiers of the 4077.
Right, it was deeper than that.
Yeah, they had virtually lived with them. I mean, the show had been broadcasting into their living rooms through the end of the Vietnam War, through Watergate, through all these massive cultural shifts.
So the viewers developed a really ingrained psychological attachment.
Exactly. They weren't tuning in just to see how a plot resolved. They were tuning in to mourn the end of a community.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
And advertisers, they know that an audience in a state of emotional vulnerability and profound attention is the most valuable audience on earth.
But behind the scenes, managing that emotional closure was just a massive logistical undertaking.
Oh, absolutely.
Because this 2.5-hour television film was directed and co-written by the series star Alan Alda, alongside, I think, 7 other collaborators.
Right, 8 writers total.
Yeah. You had 8 writers locked in a room, agonizing over a single script for months, from April to September of 1982.
That is a long time for one script.
It is. And typically, when I hear 8 writers working for 6 months on a sitcom finale, my alarm bells go off.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Exactly. Doesn't that risk creating something entirely artificial, like a finale designed by committee that just plays the hits and gives everyone a hollow hug?
It absolutely runs that risk,
Yeah.
which makes their structural choices all the more fascinating.
Mm.
Because the brilliance of Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen is that the writers aggressively rejected the concept of a victory lap.
They just refuse to do it.
Yeah, right. A neat, tidy bow would have been a fundamental betrayal of the show's core premise. I mean, this was a show set in a brutal meat grinder of a war zone.
You can't just forget that.
Exactly. To suddenly make everything peaceful just because the camera was turning off would have insulted the intelligence of that massive audience.
So instead of a party, they immediately throw the characters into the chaotic, bloody final days of the Korean War.
Yeah, the armistice is looming, but the violence isn't exactly politely pausing to wait for the paperwork to be signed.
Right. And that historical reality is crucial.
It really is. Because the final days of the Korean War were marked by frantic, desperate fighting. Both sides were just trying to claim every possible inch of territory before the ceasefire lines were drawn.
And the finale reflects this perfectly, doesn't it?
It does. The camp is suddenly overflowing with civilian refugees displaced by the shifting front lines. They're dealing with surges of prisoners of war.
They are literally taking direct mortar fire at one point. There's that incredible, chaotic sequence where a wounded tank driver crashes his tank right through the camp.
Oh yeah, the tank scene?
He demolishes the latrine and just abandons this massive piece of military hardware right in the middle of their living space. It literally puts a target on their backs.
And by doing that, the creators cemented a promise to the viewer,
Yeah.
right? They're saying, we are not abandoning our war drama roots.
Yeah, the end of a war is dangerous, it's messy, and the people caught in it are constantly on the precipice of disaster.
That's entirely the point.
Yeah.
And Hawkeye's trauma is really the perfect entry point into that broken promise of safety.
Oh, totally. To see how aggressively the show refused to offer artificial comfort, you just have to look at the opening frame.
It's jarring right from the start.
It is. The main character, Hawkeye Pierce, the brilliant, wisecracking surgeon who carried the show for 11 years, he doesn't start this highly anticipated finale in the mess hall telling a joke.
No, he doesn't.
He starts the episode locked in a psychiatric hospital.
Which is just a stunning subversion of expectations. I mean, Hawkeye is under the care of the recurring psychiatrist character, Major Sidney Friedman.
Because Hawkeye has suffered a massive PTSD-induced nervous breakdown right in the middle of the operating room.
Right. And I want to dig into the actual mechanics of this because the audience is entirely in the dark at first, aren't they?
Yeah, we're trying to solve the mystery of what broke him alongside Sidney.
So Hawkeye's talking to Sidney, and he's trying to recall this recent outing. The camp staff had taken a bus to a beach.
Just a rare day off.
Yeah. And they picked up some wounded soldiers and civilian refugees on the way back. But suddenly, they're forced to pull the bus off the dirt road and hide in the brush to avoid an enemy patrol passing nearby.
And the tension in that flashback is just unbearable.
It is. So Hawkeye tells Sidney that he remembers a refugee woman having a chicken on the bus. He told her to keep the chicken quiet, and in her panic, she smothered the animal.
But Sidney Friedman recognizes the signs of a repressed memory immediately.
He does, because the human brain is a survival machine, you know. When it encounters trauma that is too horrific for the conscious mind to process, it actively overrides its own recording systems.
So how does that work biologically?
Well, the amygdala, which processes fear, essentially short-circuits the hippocampus, which is what files our memories.
Wow.
Yeah, so the brain creates a substitute reality, in this case a chicken, to protect the psyche from completely shattering.
That is just wild.
It is. And Sidney knows that to save Hawkeye, he has to force him to dismantle that mental barricade. He has to push Hawkeye to confront the gaps and the logical inconsistencies in his story.
And when that barricade finally comes down, it is just agonizing to watch. Hawkeye completely breaks down and realizes the horrific truth.
Yeah, it wasn't a chicken on that bus.
No, it was a human baby. The refugee mother had smothered her own infant to prevent its cries from alluring the enemy patrol.
Sacrificing her child to save everyone else on the bus, it's just devastating.
And to fully grasp the impact of the scene, we really have to look at the medical context of the era, don't we?
Absolutely. The finale aired in 1983, but it was set in 1953.
Right.
So in the 1950s, the psychiatric terminology was still centered around things like shell shock or combat fatigue.
But for the audience watching in 1983, it was different.
Completely different. The framework of trauma had just undergone a massive revolution. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, had only been officially added to the psychiatric manual, the DSM-3, 3 years earlier, in 1980.
That is so recent.
It was brand new. The show was utilizing a modern medical understanding of trauma and retroactively applying it to this beloved character.
Which explains why Hawkeye's breakdown is portrayed with such terrifying clinical accuracy.
Yeah.
This isn't just like sadness or typical TV angst. It is a fundamental rewiring of his nervous system.
Yeah, and his trauma doesn't just stay neatly contained in his therapy sessions with Sydney either.
No, it bleeds out into his physical reality when he returns to the camp.
Because the autonomic nervous system doesn't care about logic once it's been traumatized. We see this when the camp starts taking mortar fire because of that abandoned tank we mentioned.
Oh, right. Hawkeye acts purely out of a deregulated fight-or-flight response?
Exactly. He jumps into the driver's seat of this massive tank and just drives it straight into the camp's garbage dump.
Completely exposing himself to enemy fire, just to draw the mortars away from the hospital tents?
Right. It looks heroic on the surface, typical protagonist stuff.
But it's actually an act of complete impulsive madness born out of trauma.
Exactly. It immediately prompts Sidney Friedman to return to the camp because Hawkeye is clearly still a danger to himself. He hasn't healed. He's just transferred his trauma into a different kind of erratic behavior.
And the most painful manifestation of his trauma is his sudden, agonizing fear of children.
Oh, that scene is so tough.
It is. B.J. Honeycutt, Hawkeye's best friend, is trying to celebrate his own daughter's birthday from thousands of miles away by throwing a party for the orphaned refugee children at the camp.
And Hawkeye physically cannot be in the room.
He just can't. He confesses to Sydney that he's terrified to look at children because the moment he does, he's pulled straight back into the suffocating terror of that bus.
And this specific storyline, I think, is the cornerstone of the episode's legacy.
How so?
Well, by taking the lead doctor, who has been the moral, resilient, and comedic center of the narrative for a decade, and crushing him under the psychological weight of the conflict, the writers honor the true, agonizing cost of war.
They're telling 121 million people that survival isn't just about dodging bullets.
Yeah, exactly. The physical wounds can be stitched up, but the invisible wounds, the moral injuries, are just as lethal and far more insidious.
And I love that the writers don't insult the audience by giving Hawkeye a magical cure before the credits roll.
Yeah, there's no scene where he suddenly feels perfectly fine.
All right. At the end of his arc, he's finally able to step up to the operating table and perform surgery on an injured young girl. It's an incredibly tense, beautiful moment.
He looks at Sidney Friedman, who is leaving the camp, and thanks him.
But the framing is very careful. It is a hard-fought step forward. He can function again. He can save a life again. But the scar of that bus will be with him for the rest of his life.
And that is the essence of a realistic portrayal of trauma. You don't erase it. You learn how to carry it.
Yeah.
And Hawkeye wasn't the only one who had to learn how to carry a new, devastating burden. As the ceasefire approaches, the episode systematically dismantles the coping mechanisms of the other key characters, too.
Well, Hawkeye's trauma is loud. He's screaming in a hospital. He's driving a tank into a garbage dump.
Right, very external.
But trauma isn't always explosive. Sometimes it's completely silent, which is what makes the storyline of Major Charles Emerson Winchester III so terrifying.
Oh, Winchester's arc in this finale is genuinely one of the most poetic and devastating pieces of television writing I have ever seen.
Let's look at who this character is for a second. Winchester is a Boston Brahmin. His entire defense mechanism throughout his time in Korea was his elitism, his snobbery.
And specifically his deep, unwavering devotion to classical music.
Right. Winchester using Mozart in a war zone is like building a psychological bomb shelter out of sheet music.
That's a great analogy.
It's a completely fragile, invisible barrier, but as long as the music plays, he can pretend the blood and the mud and the bombs outside aren't real. It connects him to a civilized world that makes sense.
Exactly. And in the finale, that fragile shelter is put to the ultimate test. He encounters 5 Chinese soldiers who arrive at the camp on a motorcycle with a sidecar.
They're enemy combatants, but they're eager to surrender.
Right. And the fascinating detail is that they aren't just soldiers, they're musicians. When Winchester finds them, they're playing a rudimentary version of the American folk song, Oh, Susanna.
And Winchester, being Winchester, is appalled by the simplistic folk music.
Of course he is.
But he is completely captivated by the fact that they're musicians. He marches them into the camp, essentially claiming them as his own personal project.
Despite a total language barrier, these prisoners recognize the name Mozart.
Yeah, that moment is so pure. So Winchester painstakingly teaches this quintet of enemy soldiers to play Mozart's clarinet quintet.
And the choice of Mozart's clarinet quintet is brilliant. It's a piece known for its sublime beauty, intertwined with a deep, underlying melancholy.
Which fits the tone perfectly.
It does. Winchester spends hours conducting them, fighting this transcendent bridge of shared humanity across enemy lines. For a brief moment, the war disappears entirely.
The music just elevates all of them above the geopolitical conflict.
Eventually, the musicians leave the camp as part of a prisoner exchange. And as they're driven away in the back of a truck, they are playing the Mozart piece beautifully. It feels like a triumph of the human spirit.
It does feel like that. But the writers refuse to let that triumph stand.
Because the war doesn't care about beautiful moments.
Exactly. Later in the episode, in the chaotic final hours before the ceasefire takes effect, a convoy of wounded soldiers pours into the camp.
Just a horrific influx of casualties.
Yeah. And Winchester is walking through the triage area, and he looks down to discover the lifeless body of one of his musicians among the casualties.
He's informed that the man died en route to the camp, and that the other 4 musicians in the quintet were killed outright in an ambush.
The people he just shared this profound, transcendent connection with have been erased in an instant.
And the visual of Winchester reacting to this news is haunting because he doesn't scream. He's completely hollowed out.
He wanders away from the triage area, back to his quarters in the swamp. He is desperate to seek comfort in his old coping mechanism to rebuild his bomb shelter.
He puts his vinyl record of Mozart's clarinet quintet onto his phonograph.
He drops the needle.
But the shelter collapses. The beauty is entirely gone. The music has been poisoned by the reality of the war.
He sits there listening to it, and the juxtaposition of the pristine music against the memory of those dead musicians is too much to bear.
In a moment of sheer silent agony and rage, he pulls the record off the turntable and violently smashes it.
I have thought about that moment so much. What does that specific loss represent for a character whose entire identity was built on his appreciation for high culture?
It represents the psychological concept of moral injury and the permanence of invisible scars. We see this cemented later in the episode when the camp staff are sharing their post-war plans.
Right, they all talk about what they're doing next.
Winchester reveals that he has secured his dream job. He will be going back to Massachusetts to become the head of thoracic surgery at Boston Mercy Hospital. It's the elite, prestigious position he's desired for the entire series.
On paper, he won. He got exactly what he wanted.
But then he delivers that line. He openly admits to his colleagues that because of what happened with the Chinese musicians, he will never be able to enjoy music again.
The episode forces you to grapple with how profound grief can permanently taint the things we once loved most.
Winchester survived the war, and he got his dream job, but his soul has been irrevocably altered. He lost the one thing that made him feel connected to the divine.
It's a terrifying realization, honestly, that you can leave a physical place, but the psychological toll changes your fundamental capacity for joy.
It is. And that theme of permanent alteration ripples through the entire camp as the ceasefire draws closer.
Right, because the armistice isn't some magic wand that resets everyone back to who they were before the draft.
No, not at all. It leads to these deeply ironic and sometimes incredibly tragic shifts in the destinies of the characters. We see this play out in the specific fates of the rest of the 4Hell's 77th personnel.
Let's look at Father Mulcahy, the camp's Catholic priest.
Okay.
Throughout the series, Mulcahy has always struggled with feeling somewhat ineffectual compared to the surgeons who are literally holding lives in their hands.
He always wanted to do more.
Exactly. In the finale, he's out in the holding area, which is under heavy enemy mortar fire, desperately trying to rescue prisoners of war from the holding pen.
And during this selfless act, a mortar blast occurs incredibly close to him, and he loses his hearing.
But he makes this conscious, desperate choice to swear B.J. Honeycutt, the doctor who examines him, to absolute secrecy about his deafness. He refuses to let DJ put it in his medical file.
Because he knows the military bureaucracy. If the Army finds out he's deaf, they'll medically discharge him and immediately send him back to the United States.
And Mulcahy is terrified of being taken away from the local Korean orphans he's dedicated his free time to protecting and tending to.
The irony there is so thick. His selfless sacrifice in the war costs him his hearing, but it completely alters his life's trajectory in a meaningful way.
Right, in his post-war plans, Mulcahy announces that he's going to leave the traditional priesthood entirely so he can dedicate the rest of his life to working with the deaf.
The injury gives him a new, lifelong purpose.
Exactly. And then you have the profound psychological shift of Max Klinger.
Oh, Klinger is fascinating.
For the entire 11-year duration of the series, Klinger's singular defining characteristic was his desperate desire to escape Korea.
He famously wore dresses, he pulled elaborate stunts, he ate a jeep piece by piece. He did everything humanly possible to secure a Section 8 discharge.
And for anyone unfamiliar with the military terminology, a Section 8 was a discharge classification for a soldier deemed mentally unfit for service. Klinger's entire existence was a performance designed to prove he was crazy so he could go home to Toledo.
Right. But in the finale, the man who spent a decade trying to flee makes the exact opposite choice.
He falls deeply in love.
Yes, with a local Korean refugee named Soon-Lee Han. Soon-Lee is determined to return to the active combat zone to search for her missing parents.
And Klinger decides to marry her, and he voluntarily chooses to stay in Korea to help her search. It is the ultimate irony, but it makes perfect emotional sense, you know? It explores how the environments we fight against the hardest can eventually shape the identities we embrace.
The war stripped away his old identity and gave him a new one rooted in love and sacrifice.
And we see an entirely different kind of heartbreak with BJ Honeycutt.
Oh, BJ's story is just agonizing.
It is. BJ is a character whose entire emotional anchor is his wife, Peg, and his young daughter, Erin, back in San Francisco. He actually receives his repatriation orders early in the finale. He gets to go home.
But it leads to this sequence where he has to leave the camp immediately, which means he misses the chance to give Hawkeye, who is still away at the psychiatric hospital, a proper goodbye.
It really echoes the painful way the character Trapper John left earlier in the series.
It does. BJ is rushing, completely desperate to make it back to California in time for his daughter's birthday.
But then he collides with the unfeeling reality of military bureaucracy. He makes it as far as Guam. He can practically smell the California coast.
And while in Guam, his orders are suddenly revoked. The Army, in its infinite bureaucratic wisdom, recalls him as his own replacement and sends him right back to the 40th 77th in Korea.
It's like running a marathon, seeing the finish line ribbon 2 feet in front of you, and suddenly a judge tells you that you have to turn around and run all the way back to the starting line.
It is psychological torture.
He ends up celebrating his daughter's birthday, sitting in the dirt at the camp, surrounded by orphaned refugee children, thousands of miles away from his own child.
It's a brilliant way to show that even when you are told you're free, you're still entirely at the mercy of the machine.
The rest of the camp is also navigating their own forced transitions, too.
Yeah, Colonel Potter, the steady paternal leader of the camp, is finally retiring from the Army after a lifetime of military service.
He plans to go home to his wife, Mildred, and become a small-town doctor.
But before he leaves, he takes one final, quiet ride on Sophie, the horse he acquired earlier in the series.
It is this beautiful, dignified moment of closure for an old cavalryman before he donates Sophie to the local orphanage.
And Margaret Houlihan, who has always been married to the military institution, finds her path too. She is offered a respectable Army administrative post stateside.
She also finally receives emotional closure with Winchester, which is a big deal.
Yeah, throughout the series, Winchester treated her with immense elitist disdain. But in the finale, he genuinely apologizes for his past behavior and gifts her a signed book of her favorite poetry.
It's a testament to how the shared trauma of the war forced these disparate personalities to mature and respect one another.
And the writers even took the time to map out the fates of the minor recurring characters. It provides this vital contrast of lingering comedy against the heavy drama.
Like Sergeant Rizzo, the motor pool mechanic, he announces he plans to breed frogs to sell to French restaurants.
Right, and Private Igor, the long-suffering mess tent server, decides he's going to take up pig farming.
Nurse Kelly is being reassigned back to her hometown in Honolulu.
So many moving parts.
Yeah, I look at all these moving parts. Some characters are emotionally destroyed, some find unexpected romance, some find a new religious calling, and some are just going off to farm pigs.
It's a wide spectrum.
I'm curious about the structure here. In a lesser show, giving every single character a completely different, highly specific ending might feel incredibly artificial, like the writers were just going down a checklist. How did they avoid making it feel manufactured?
They avoided it by leaning into the historical reality of the situation. This scattered, radically uneven distribution of fates perfectly mimics the random, chaotic nature of the end of a war.
That makes sense.
A ceasefire doesn't tie everyone's life up neatly into a single cohesive narrative. A military unit isn't a family that stays together. It's a temporary community forged by geographic force.
And when the orders come down, that community fractures instantly and blows to the wind.
By embracing the randomness, the tragedy next to the comedy next to the mundane, the writers capture the messy reality of life simply moving forward.
And what I find absolutely fascinating is that just as the characters were watching their world physically and metaphorically dismantle, the actual production crew behind the scenes was facing a literal destruction of their own.
Oh, the intersection of reality and fiction during the production of this episode is truly remarkable.
It's one of the most incredible behind-the-scenes stories in television history.
Walk us through it.
So on October 9, 1982, right in the middle of their production schedule for the finale, a massive wildfire swept through the Santa Monica Mountains in California.
Right.
The exterior set of the 4077th was located deep in Malibu Creek State Park. And this wasn't just a close call with some smoke. The fire ripped right through the area and destroyed much of the physical set.
The tents, the props, the physical space where these actors had filmed for 11 years was literally turned to ash.
In the logistical reality of television production, a disaster of that magnitude would usually shut everything down.
Oh, absolutely. You're on a strict schedule with a massive budget. The standard operating procedure would be to retreat to the indoor sound stages at the studio.
Or spend money to quickly rebuild enough of the set to fake it.
Or furiously rewrite the script to completely hide the damage from the audience.
But the writers and producers of MASH did something completely counterintuitive. They leaned directly into the catastrophe.
Instead of hiding the ashes, they wrote 2 entirely new scenes to incorporate a massive forest fire into the actual story of the finale.
They wrote it so that an incendiary bombing nearby causes a fire that forces the camp to temporarily pack up and relocate.
And they went even further than that. They didn't rely on special effects or sound stages to sell the new storyline. On October 15th, mere days after the blaze had swept through, Harry Morgan, who played Colonel Potter, and Kelly Nakahara, who played Nurse Kelly, returned to Malibu Creek State Park.
Wow.
They actually filmed a scene walking through the real, still smoldering ruins of their own set.
The concept of verisimilitude there is just astounding to me. The literal destruction of the real-world set perfectly mirrored the narrative necessity of taking down the fictional camp for the last time.
It strips away all the polished Hollywood sheen. They're walking through the actual ashes of their own 11-year history.
It adds this layer of raw, documentary-like authenticity to their goodbye that you simply cannot manufacture.
It really is the ultimate visual metaphor for a complete finale. The physical space is gone. It serves as a stark, undeniable reminder to the characters, the actors, and crucially to the audience watching at home that the era is truly over.
You cannot go back to the way things were because the physical place you want to go back to literally no longer exists.
The smoldering ruins force a profound psychological acceptance of finality.
And that profound acceptance of finality leads us directly into the final moments of the episode and the indelible image it left on the American public.
The conclusion of the episode is essentially a sequence of final salutes, both literal and metaphorical, as the camp is physically torn down around them.
The choreography of the final scenes is beautiful. We see the tents being struck and loaded onto trucks. Father Mulcahy officially marries Klinger and Soon Lee right in the middle of the camp as it is being dismantled.
Everyone is saying their goodbyes and leaving in their own highly personalized ways. Winchester, in a moment of pure, cynical poetry for a Boston elite, leaves the camp sitting in the cab of a garbage truck.
And declaring to the others, what better way to leave a garbage dump?
Exactly.
Margaret Houlihan says her tearful goodbyes to Potter, BJ, and Winchester, and Hawkeye grabs her for one last, long, passionate kiss.
And then we have the farewell between the leaders. Hawkeye and BJ stand before Colonel Potter. They don't offer a joke. They offer him a final parting gift, a heartfelt, perfectly crisp military salute.
And Potter, a man who has seen more war and loss than any of them, tearfully returns it. It is a moment of profound, silent mutual respect that transcends all the insubordination of the past decade.
Which brings us to the very last scene of the series.
Yeah.
BJ gives Hawkeye a ride on the back of his motorcycle to get him to the waiting helicopter that will finally take him out of the war zone. They have a quiet, deeply intimate moment before the chopper arrives.
They agree that despite the hell, the trauma, and the blood of the war, they genuinely enjoyed their shared experiences together at the camp. They survived because they had each other.
As the chopper starts its engines and the rotors begin spinning, BJ has to shout over the deafening noise. He promises to track Hawkeye down back in Alaska.
But he adds this curious line. He says he left a note this time, just in case they never see each other again. He rides off on his bike, leaving Hawkeye completely confused.
Right, Hawkeye doesn't understand what BJ means about a note. He climbs into the helicopter, and it begins to gain altitude. He looks out the window, down at the launch pad.
And there it is.
There, meticulously spelled out in white rocks on the ground below, is the word goodbye.
Hawkeye sees it, a smile breaks across his face, and the chopper carries him away into the sky as the screen fades out.
It is an image that is forever burned into the minds of those 121.6 million viewers.
The emotional resonance of that word in the stones is staggering, because in that moment, the medium of television broke the fourth wall without any character ever turning to look at the camera.
That goodbye spelled out in the rocks isn't just B.J. Honeycutt speaking to Hawkeye Pierce. It is Alan Alda, the writers, the actors, and the crew speaking directly to the 105.97 million people sitting in the dark in their living rooms.
It is a tangible, lingering farewell that honors the profound parasocial relationship that had been built over the past 11 years.
And the impact of that farewell was absolute. The ratings record set by Goodbye, Farewell, Amen was so monumental that it held unbroken for 27 years.
From 1983 all the way until 2010.
Right, when it was finally passed in total viewership by Super Bowl XLV. But even today, decades later, it still stands as the most watched single episode of any television series in U.S. history.
However, the sheer gravity and perfection of that ending created a unique corporate problem for the network, CBS.
Oh, definitely.
MASH was arguably the most successful financial property in television history, and network executives were desperate not to lose the franchise completely. They could not accept the finality that the writers had so painstakingly created.
Right, the network machine immediately tried to keep it alive. They quickly greenlit a spin-off series called Aftermash.
Yeah, Aftermash. The premise followed the post-war adventures of Colonel Potter, Max Klinger, and Father McKay, who all conveniently end up working together in a stateside veterans hospital in Missouri.
And initially, purely because of the lingering love for the MASH name, the premiere episodes had huge viewership.
But very quickly, script problems, a lack of the original creative magic, and constant character changes led to a sharp decline in ratings. CBS was forced to cancel it after just 2 seasons.
And that wasn't even their only attempt to resurrect the property. In 1984, they produced a pilot for another would-be spin-off called Walter, starring Gary Berghoff reprising his beloved role as Raider O'Reilly.
Oh, right, with him now working as a police officer in St. Louis.
Yeah. But the pilot was deemed so disconnected from what made the original show work that it was never even picked up to series. It aired once as a special presentation and was largely forgotten.
So, looking back at it, why couldn't they recapture the magic? Why did an audience of 121 million people suddenly evaporate when offered more time with these characters?
I believe those failed spin-offs actually prove a vital overarching point about the finale itself. Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen was so definitive, so emotionally complete, and so respectful of the audience's grief that the stories simply could not be artificially continued.
The magic of the finale was its absolute uncompromising finality.
Exactly. The audience had watched the camp burn to ashes, they had seen Hawkeye's psyche shatter, they had seen Winchester permanently lose his love for music.
And they had seen the word goodbye spelled out in stone.
Trying to undo that closure to sell more soap and car commercials felt like a betrayal. The audience rejected it because they knew the true story had ended exactly as it was supposed to.
It makes complete sense. I mean, trying to launch a sitcom out of that finale is like trying to relight a fire from wet ashes.
Very well said.
The MASH finale earned its legendary untouchable status precisely because it refused to compromise the reality of its characters. It didn't flinch.
Not once.
It fully embraced the crushing clinical trauma of Hawkeye in that psychiatric hospital, and it honored the deep, permanent grief of Winchester losing the beauty of art right alongside the joy of Klinger finding love and staying in Korea, or the mundane comedy of Igor wanting to be a pig farmer.
It showed us that the best finales, the ones that actually stick in the cultural consciousness for decades, don't just tie up loose ends neatly.
They reflect the messy, painful, beautiful reality of life moving forward. They honor everything that came before while forcing us to accept that we have to let it go.
It's a profound lesson in how we handle closure. The episode ends with Hawkeye looking down at the word goodbye, spelled out in stones. But think about the physical nature of stones.
Okay.
They are permanent, they are unmovable. In a world where military tents are packed up into trucks, helicopters fly away, and memories can be tragically repressed or lost entirely, those stones remained anchored to the earth. It makes you wonder, in our own lives, when we are forced to move on from a defining era or a tight-knit community, what are the permanent stones we leave behind for the people we survive it with?
What a beautiful thought to carry forward, because in a way, looking back at that stormy night in February of 1983, with the power flickering across California and the streets completely empty across the country, those 121 million people weren't just watching a television show end.
No, they weren't.
They were gathering around to read the stones left behind by a group of creators who fundamentally changed what a story could do. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a true piece of American history, and we hope you carry that thought with you until next time.